Uldaman, the oddly lime green vault of ancient Titan knowledge and artifacts buried deep under the Badlands of the Eastern Kingdoms, the place that lit the fuses of so many of the longest running and most intriguing mysteries in the World of Warcraft. Mysteries that in a lot of ways we still don't have comprehensive answers to. I'm Shupsy. Today in Warcraft Space and Story, we're going to see how game design can help lore to answer story questions, and also to fuel so many more. I can't help but feel Uldaman represents something really interesting when we remember to put ourselves in the shoes of a mid-level 30s player back in vanilla WoW. There's almost this unspoken acknowledgement from Blizzard that now that the player is in the back half of their journey, that it was time to pay off some of the story threads that have been set up so far. In this case, nothing makes that more clear than when you consider the experience of a dwarf or gnome player who got told way back in their intro cinematic that,
driven to discover the truth about his people's fabled origins, the great king Magni Bronzebeard ordered that the dwarves shift their industry from mining to archaeology.
As we make our way through the pre-dungeon, we can really see this policy in effect. So Uldaman was originally a dig site of the Bronzebeard dwarves, the player clan, but was aggressively taken over by the Dark Iron clan, and now you, the hero, was here to stop them using the ancient knowledge of this place for evil. As we emerge from the narrow, snaking dig site paths, we get this great view and vantage point of the dungeon entrance in all its gigantic glory. It's the kind of clever visual reveal where you're meant to just stop and appreciate, to the point there's even a designated spot for doing so. Now what's interesting is that all the Titan areas in WoW are usually themed around a real-world culture with a fantasy twist. So Ulduar is steampunk Nordic, Uldum is sci-fi Egyptian, and the Mogu have a lot of space and star-based aesthetics to go with their feudal Chinese look. However, Uldaman pretty much plays it straight with the Greco-Roman theme, barring the colour palette, and that absolutely works for it, because there are few things that are as much of a visual shorthand for fallen and forgotten glory as Greco-Roman ruins. Before we get into the dungeon proper, I do want to give a little bit of a warning. A lot of the lore that's going to be discussed comes from Volume 1 of the World of Warcraft Chronicle, which was released recently, and so might be spoilers for some people. I'm going to try to not ruin any of the big oh wow moments or drift off topic too much, and believe me, there's a lot of cool stuff in there to go on a tangent about. But there's no way to cover this place properly without using that as a resource, so be warned. Once we enter the dungeon proper, we get a real sense for the second of the competing themes in Uldaman. The various Titan structures and buildings we pass through are grand, roomy, and meticulously designed, even in their ruined state, while the dig site paths are cluttered, constrained, and winding. The difference, though, is that the digs are active, they're living and changing, while the Titan areas feel, for the time being, cold and dead. The next room really plays on that feeling. Regardless of which of the two entrances you take, you see something between the pillars, benches, and vases, and of course the trogs, that's out of the ordinary, so it catches your eye and draws you to it. What you find is this guy. There's no real lore or even quests associated with him, though we can obviously see he's one of the Titan Forged, which is the new collective term for the Keepers and Watchers, and that he didn't die at peace. His book is dropped and he's crumpled against the wall. So what that means to someone seeing all this with fresh eyes is that they've finally found something that fits this place, huge, stony and ancient, something that must be connected to the Titans. But it's dead and gone, so we're going to have to dig deeper for answers. From our fallen friend, the path splits again into right and left, though through the left path we're given something of a visual goal in investigating that cave behind the collapsed wall, highlighted by the weirdly purple wood. So when a path splits in a game, the two paths should have different experiences, but by no means do they have to have equally engaging ones. Both are right, but one can be more right. Now in this case, more right means a boss in the Lost Wars, at least for Horde side players. And as we get closer, we can see that they're holed up and using tables and boxes as makeshift defences. Beyond being a cute shout out to the Lost Vikings, by Blizzard, these guys actually have some lore to them. They were the muscle hired by the Explorers League to clear the way for the Bronzebeard dig, but between the Trogs and Dark Iron, they've been pushed back into this tiny little cave. So as Alliance players, you're breaking the siege on them and rescuing them, for which you're rewarded with information, while the Horde comes in, kills them, and takes the knowledge instead. Either way, it's revealed that two artifacts are needed to create the Staff of Prehistoria, and open a magically sealed chamber ahead, the Nikiv medallion, which you find in Balog's chest, and the other, the Shaft of Soul, which is with a trog named Revelosh. Just before we get to Revelosh, I want to acknowledge these murals, or stone reliefs, whatever you want to call them. There's three main ones that are repeated throughout the dungeon. They've always kind of bugged me. They're not very clear due to both vanilla texture quality and how abstract what's happening in them is, but more than that, they don't really match the aesthetic of WoW, being far less cartoony and exaggerated than the usual look of Warcraft. So instead of spending time trying to decipher each one, we're going to do a little what the heck are these meant to be bonus round at the end of the video. And now we get to Revelosh. Larger and uniquely coloured compared to the rest of the trogs, he obviously stands out as a boss and is positioned in such a way that he's effectively the gatekeeper to the rest of the dungeon. As to his lore, he collects, or steals, artifacts, and the dungeon journal calls him basically the closest thing there is to a trog archaeologist. Whether or not that behaviour began before or after the Explorers League first came through, it still says something interesting about the link between trogs and dwarves. So with the staff of Prehistoria assembled, we move once more into the dig site section of Uldaman, and immediately our attention is caught by the map/city layout in the middle of the room. Now this is cool because it furthers a lot of different story threads simultaneously. So it obviously hints to the scale of what Uldaman originally was, in that we now know it was an entire city, and at the same time it suggests that whatever happened to the Titan races here was a sudden thing, because the place is also unfinished. Why else would there be a miniature scale model in the middle of a dirt hole? So the placing of the staff is very, very Indiana Jones, but at the same time it kind of signifies that this ancient place is starting to come alive again. And on that note, here is Ironaya.
None may steal the secrets of the makers.
From the perspective of our hypothetical newbie, this time we found a Titan something that's moving, talking, and wants to kill us, but still, progress. Now, as to Ironaya herself, she certainly looks and is dressed like a Titan forged, but the Chronicle is pretty consistent in calling her a giantess, so the female version of something like this guy. Either way, she's an important part of the Titan Forge story on early Azeroth, and is absolutely central to the story of Uldaman, because she built the place, originally as a vault to contain the Trogs, who were a failed attempt to create a worker race. From Ironaya onwards, the shape of the dungeon changes significantly. It becomes much more non-linear and a little harder to follow, going back to the tunnel systems and unorganised feel of the pre-dungeon, but at the same time it's really cleverly made to be basically foolproof. Every path will lead you to a boss or some other major point of interest unless you're willfully going backwards. And to illustrate that, I'm going to do something a little different and open up the map to show you. As you can see, every dead end is filled with a boss, barring the closest one on our right, but even that has the enchanting trainer from back when you needed to seek out high-level profession trainers in the world. Some of the paths even flow into each other. It's also why we don't really see consistent guiding lights throughout Uldaman like the flowers in Moradon were, because you're meant to explore and engage in all the little pieces of story throughout this place. Speaking of, this little path here would have been many players' first ever sight of the Earthen, and a few things would stick out to them. They look like dwarves, they mine like dwarves, and they're obviously hard at work, industriousness being a dwarven trait. And from that, anyone would be able to make the assumption that these are their ancestors, especially when you consider things like the racial stone form, or the Mountain King avatar ability in Warcraft 3. However, this is one of those answers that raises questions like, why are they here? How long have they been here? And what happened to make some of them dwarves? And at the end of the path, we find a little overlook into a Titan building, teeming with earthen and stone golems, and a far cry from the cold, dead halls of earlier. So while I was being metaphorical when I said Ionaya's activation brought this place alive, in a lot of ways she can be seen as sort of the clear turning point in the Titan story throughout Uldaman. Overseeing this room, we find the Ancient Stone Keeper. He's one of the two higher order golems who were tasked to watch over Uldaman and all its sleeping denizens until his inevitable demise. The other is the Obsidian Sentinel, who we can find among a group of dark iron dwarves and not his own kind, which in and of itself is kind of a hint, but basically this guy has been corrupted by the old gods. He's still technically doing his job guarding the Echo Mock Cavern, which acts as a second instance portal, kind of similar to the side gate in Stratholme, but more and more of the corruption in this place is seeping into him, and we can guess that's how Yogg-Saron's Curse of Flesh reached into this place. Another of the paths of Uldaman leads us to Galgan Firehammer and his Dark Iron Dwarves. So if we compare this to the setup of the Lost Dwarves earlier, we see some interesting similarities and differences. The Lost Dwarves' little fortifications seem much more desperate and makeshift, whereas these guys have gun emplacements, bombs, and barrels of explosives set up. So even through the random doodads, you get a feel for the much more militant nature of the Dark Iron clan. As to Galgan himself, he is a Dark Iron senator from Blackrock Mountain, which cements the huge importance of Titan-related history to the dwarves, in that they're willing to risk high-level politicians and a lot of people and resources to secure a site like this for themselves. And here we see basically a replica of the gate to the instance itself that leads to a room called the Stone Vault, and inside we find Grimlock, the self-proclaimed king of the Trogs with his pet basilisk. So just like with Revelosh, it's another hint that the Trogs have some primitive level of understanding of more organised culture. As to the space itself, and this is just my interpretation of this section, but based on its name, the Stone Vault, and the huge elaborate doorway that could have presumably sealed it off at one point, I think this is where the Trogs were originally held, while the rest of Uldaman was to continue as a city. Especially because, as you see on the sides, it looks like this place has been tunnelled through. And finally, peeking through the boards on the left, we see this grand structure. There's a lot that speaks to its significance, such as the highlighting effect. It looks like light is pouring out from behind it, its unique shape compared to everything we've encountered so far, and the fact that it's at the end of the instance. Never discount the little things. As we go through this hall of crafters, we're led into a large circular room, with, much like the map room earlier, a focal point in its centre that we have to interact with to activate the enemies and keep moving. Something that I think is really cool, because it's almost mirroring the beginning of the dungeon. There's not really been a consistent sense of any one particular kind of movement throughout Uldaman, but certainly here in the last section of it, down is the way we tend to be going, reinforcing the sense that we're descending further and further into ancient mysteries, and exploring more than anyone else ever has. Our exploration leads us to the Chamber of Khazgoroth, where absolutely everything is designed to focus the eyes on the giant figure standing in the centre of the room, that looks just like the one we encountered at the start of the dungeon. The figure is also surrounded by a sort of terracotta army of earthen and golems, which says that they are in stasis voluntarily, otherwise someone went to great efforts to arrange many giant stone people in symbolic patterns. What's kind of cool about this encounter is that the previous room tutorialized us on what to do here and what to expect as we interact with the device to awaken the enemies.
Who dares awaken Arcadus? Who dares the wrath of the Makers?
And then this is Arcadus. And he's actually one of the foremost Titanforged keepers, despite being a level 40 boss. He was involved in battling the Elemental Lords and the Achaea, but the reason he ended up in stasis here in Uldaman is that the Earthen following him, Ionaya and the Watcher Tyr were beginning to succumb to the curse of flesh and let themselves be frozen until a possible cure was found. With Arcadus slain, a final door opens up and reveals a room literally glowing with gold, jewels and treasure, but positioned to be so much more important than all that are the platinum discs of Norganon, which give you a quest to summon the Lawkeeper of Norganon, who explains that the Trogs were a failed offshoot of the Earthen, while confirming that the Earthen are the progenitors of the Dwarves. Is one of the very, very few times Blizzard characterizes the players or has them speak in universe in any tangible way, and most of it is you going, "Oh wow," or "So you're saying," which to me speaks of a confidence in Blizzard that this information is causing you as a player to react with the same surprise and hunger for knowledge. The discs themselves are the real reason for everything not Trog related in Uldaman. When Loken, who was the Titanforged Prime Designate, so the person responsible for keeping things in order, started visibly going mad, Tyr, Arcadus and Ionaya hatched a plan to steal the discs which record everything that happens on Azeroth and hid them here. A number of the Titanforged worker races, such as the Earthen, Mechanomes and Brykel, joined them in leaving Ulduar and the Storm Peaks, and it's because of this exodus that we have many of the Alliance races currently in the game. Overall, the story of Uldaman is the story of the search for knowledge, and how whoever controls the knowledge has power, whether it be keeping the discs away from Loken, or the Dark Iron Dwarfs fighting to claim they discovered the history of their people, right up to us as heroes adventuring through and gaining our own knowledge. It's also worth thinking about what this place kicked off. There are hints of the old gods and the curse of flesh throughout this whole place. And remember, we didn't really know what an old god was until AQ40 with Cthulhu. Then there's what this space set up about the Titans. And we learnt with the Chronicle that we know very, very little about the Titans. I've been Shubsy, and that's been the story of the space and how the space has told the story. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please like this video and feel free to subscribe. I absolutely love hearing from you guys, good or bad. So if you have some constructive criticism or want to suggest somewhere to look at, please leave a comment. And thank you for your time. Now on to the matter of these murals. As I said in the video, to the best of my knowledge, no one really knows what's going on in these, so a lot of this section is going to be wild guesses and theories built off of those wild guesses. The first one that we see outside Uldaman is this scene, which seems to show a large group of humans walking and talking. They're all depicted in a very Roman-esque style with a lot of togas and dramatically turned heads. What's interesting though are the kids along the bottom, because they're also in elaborate togas and seem to be having their own conversations, apart from the really tiny hooded figure in the centre of each repetition. Now I think this is meant to depict the humans migrating into the Eastern Kingdoms, which is astonishing because the human-Titan connection was hinted at, but not made clear till the Wrath of the Lich King. More than that though, I think the kids are actually dwarves and gnomes, and thanks to the power of MS Paint, I can show you what I mean. Assuming the humans are meant to be very early humans or even Vrykul, we can say that the other races are earthen and mecha gnomes, which would mean Blizzard had planned out the story of the Exodus from Northrend prior to 2004, and we didn't know about it till 2016 with the Chronicle. The next repeats a lot throughout the dungeon, and it shows what I'm next to sure is Aya with some kind of smiling man holding a fish. Babies and barn animals are also involved. The babies are maybe human children, and Aya started seeing herself as their sort of matron, while the fish dude is a fleshy Vrykul who's super chuffed to be able to feed people now that they actually have to eat. So hence the barn animals. And the last one is Zeus. Someone swapped out his Thunderbolt for babies and he's not really that impressed. Of this three, this one's kind of the most frustrating to work out because it's not Zeus. But if I had to try and contextualize it in what we know about Uldaman and Warcraft in general, then it's maybe Arcadus without his hood on. Otherwise, there's not really much else that can be taken from this one. If my guesses for the first two are even close to correct, then my hat off to Blizzard big time, because that means they've known and have been working on these storylines since WoW's development in the early 2000s, and have been carefully feeding us a mixture of small hints and big reveals since then. If not, then, well, it's another mystery Uldaman has yet to unveil. So thank you for more of your time.